Assurance 19 Operations and Maintenance requires the following. I'm going to read this right out of the manual here. The airport and facilities which are necessary to serve the aeronautical users of the airport, other than facilities owned by or controlled by the United States, shall be operated at all times in a safe and serviceable condition and in accordance with the minimum standards for maintenance and operation, and it will not cause or permit any activity or actions thereon which would interfere with its use for airport purposes. Is that, do you agree with that? I mean, it's out of the manual.
I'm not familiar with it by word, but it sounds
okay.
Right.
It sounds right. Okay. So would you also agree that the FAA Airport Compliance Manual, Section 22.6, request for interim use of aeronautical property for other uses generally requires the FAA to approve the use of airport facilities for non-aeronautical purposes, and in fact, it explicitly states that the FAA approval shall not be granted if the FAA determines that an aeronautical demand is likely to exist within the period of interim use.
I believe that's accurate. That's my understanding.
Yeah, it's right out of the manual. I'll give it to you if you want to see it. So these documents from the FAA make it abundantly clear that airports are restricted in their ability to use their facilities for non-aeronautical purposes, and when they are doing that, or when they're requesting so, they must receive FAA approval. The restrictions are in place to protect the flying public and the safety, but also to protect the investment that taxpayers have made in federally funded airports. Yet, I will tell you, I've seen a disturbing trend in cities choosing to use their airports, such as Chicago, O'Hare, Midway, Boston's Logan's, as facilities to house illegal foreign nationals brought here by the administration's, well, I'm going to say failure to enforce the immigration laws on the books. And that clearly falls, in my mind, into the category of non-aeronautical use. Now, my question to you is, has the FAA approved any request to use airports to house illegal foreign nationals?
So to your explanation, the FAA does have a role in...
I know it does, but I'm just asking if you've approved, you're the administrator, has the FAA approved any requests to house illegal foreign nationals?
So I'm going to answer that if you'll let me.
Okay.
My understanding is
I just want to use the time efficiently here.
Yeah. So the FAA does approve requests for community use, whatever the category. There's a huge number of categories for community use, and our criteria is whether it interrupts aeronautical uses or is otherwise disruptive.
So how many requests have been approved for housing illegal foreign nationals?
My understanding is there's been one airport that has made that request.
So the others that I mentioned, well, was the one that made the request any of the ones that I mentioned?
I believe it was either Kennedy or O'Hare. I can't remember for sure.
Okay, so it could be O'Hare, but then it wouldn't be Midway or Logan, yet they're housing illegal foreign nationals at the airport. Did the FAA make the required determination that no aeronautical demand is likely to exist? This is an airport, and I'm reading right from your regulation here, Chapter 22.6. Did the FAA make that determination?
The determination was that it did not interfere with aeronautical uses.
So in that case, I guess the FAA won't enforce its grant assurances, which it says right here, literally on number 1, these assurances shall be complied with in performance of grant agreements for airport development, airport planning, noise compatibility program, grants for airport sponsors. So the federal government's paying for it. They make the agreement, agree to it, and then don't follow it, and the FAA is not going to do anything about it. I want to yield some time to a friend, but let me just ask this question. How does walling off portions of the airport to house unvetted illegal foreign nationals, which passengers in America have to walk beside, these are unvetted illegal foreign nationals, how does that promote safety or utility or efficiency in these airports?
I think you're out of my area of expertise. I'm not familiar with that circumstance.
I think that answers the question. I'm going to yield some time to my good friend from Texas, Mr. Nels.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Administrator, I'm going to reference a letter dated February 5th, 2024 to the Honorable Maria Cantwell and Honorable Ted Cruz. Are you familiar with this letter on February 5th that you sent?
I'm not sure what the topic is.
Okay, I'm going to make sure, because I'm going to make sure that you get a copy of this letter, so when it comes to me, I have a lot of questions regarding this letter. I yield back.
Thank you. Gentleman yields back. Recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Administrator, for coming today, helping us out on some things. First question I had, in your testimony, you mentioned the hotline that workers can call, as well as a whistleblower hotline. Do you have that phone number? Can you, for the record, state what it is? Can you remind folks where they can go in order to make that call?
We have a link on our website, so FAA.gov, where you can go find access to that hotline. We've also set up a specific hotline for Boeing employees, which we have had communicated out at the factory so they can reach us directly.
Is that on FAA.gov as well?
Yes, it is.
So for Boeing employees, they can go to FAA.gov right now if they have any concerns.
Absolutely.
Is that a confidential communication?
It's run through a very confidential process. We have a group that focuses on whistleblowers to make sure identity is protected and that appropriate actions are taken.
Thank you very much. I know you've, FAA has chosen to put inspectors in the facilities. Does that include in Spirit as well?
We do have inspectors in Spirit as well, yes.
Yeah, and that's new. And can you give us a range of the numbers of people that you've deployed into the Boeing and Spirit facilities?
I think we have about 24 at Boeing and maybe a half a dozen at Spirit.
Yeah. And can you give an indication of whether you think that'll be permanent? Is this going to be short-term? How long does this last? Is it part of what you need to be doing as part of a permanent solution?
So we're undertaking a 6-week audit, so we're in the middle of that now, and that audit will give us guidance on where we need to go. I think we're also going to look at this culture survey that's due at the end of the month, and then make a determination of how many folks we need on the ground in both places. So we haven't made that determination, but I do anticipate we will want to keep people on the ground there. So we don't know how many yet, but we do think that presence will be warranted.
Do you have any initial thoughts on the impact of the MAX 9 accident and its influence in your decision-making about ODA authorities and how much to pull back from Boeing at this time?
I think the events of January 5th, it really created two issues for us. One, what's wrong with this airplane? But two, what's going on with the production at Boeing. And there have been issues in the past, and they don't seem to be getting resolved. So we feel like we need to have a heightened level of oversight to really get after that. So it was certainly triggered by the MAX 9, yes.
But nothing, no permanent decision yet about removing some authority from the ODA organization at Boeing?
No
on a permanent
decisions.
basis.
I mean, we've tasked MITRE to give us a view on what the options are. I've heard Boeing CEO mention an option for third-party quality control. So I think it's important that we look at all options on the table and understand how do we make changes that are going to give us a different result than we've had.
Yeah, thanks. I want to move to a little bit more to the FAA bill that we passed. I jokingly asked you ahead of time if I was going to ask you if it was a great bill or greatest bill, but we really want to impress upon the Senate how important this is to get. They're trying to get it done, but how important it is to get a final bill done. Is there anything in that bill? Can you talk to anything in that bill that you would have needed ahead of this, or do you have ahead of January 5th, or do you have everything that you need for at least for this particular investigation?
Well, I guess I'll make two comments. One is we really appreciate the effort on the bill because it creates a huge amount of disruption to not have it. So the constant running up against deadlines, I've only been there 3 months and I probably had a dozen meetings on what happens if there's a shutdown, what happens if we don't have authorization. So it does create a lot of uncertainty for us. I don't see anything in particular that, it's possible I'll come back in 6 months and tell you that, we need something. I think we're going to need more boots on the ground. We're going to need more inspectors. We don't have that many inspectors on the aircraft certification side of the house. So that will be an addition of manpower. But we haven't scoped that, and I think we can do it within our current authorities as long as we can find the funds for it.
Yeah, great. So I did outline some of the issues in the 23 bill on accessibility, on BV loss, a few other things, and we'll just get back to you with those for the record as well. But thanks for coming up. Appreciate it, and you'll back.
Yep.
Thank you, Ranking Member Larson. Chairman Westerman's going to defer, and we're going to recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mast.
Thank you, Chairman. Administrator, I want to talk a little bit about training and air traffic controllers, and I want to go back to November. You announced that the FAA would expand Collegiate Training Initiative, also known as CTI, and those programs to harness specifically the underutilized capacity among college programs that meet the FAA's equivalent levels of safety to help train air traffic controllers. We all know that's something that we need, and help address that shortage of, potentially 3,000, maybe more, maybe a little less air traffic controllers, certified controllers. And my question is, I want you to bring us up to speed on what the FAA has done since November to implement a new enhanced CTI program. What's being done?
So we've done what we're trying to do is make sure that these schools are duplicating the curriculum that we teach at the academy. So we've put some definition around what that curriculum is, and also looking at what physical tools they need. So flight simulators, tower simulators, things of that nature, to put together a very clear curriculum. And my goal is to make sure that in the academic year 24-25, we're actually executing on this, so that we start to see graduates from those schools come directly into FAA to be controllers. The immediacy of the issue is why we're pushing so hard. So of the couple dozen CTI schools out there, we're hoping to have at least half of them able to start training students beginning in the fall.
Do you see new programs opening up as a result of your efforts?
I'd like to see that. It hasn't been our initial focus. We're trying to work with the schools that are already sort of set into that space, but I don't see any reason why other schools, particularly those with a technical bent, can't have this program as well.
Okay. That's the extent of my questioning today, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the remainder of my time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mast. I recognize the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Stanton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to the administrator. Thank you for being here, for coming to speak to us today, your first hearing before this committee. Americans are upset. They have a right to be upset. Last month, door plugs failed on a 737 MAX 9 and caused the door plug to fly off mid-flight. Thank God no one was seriously injured in this accident, but make no mistake, this was a close call, too close. The incident, along with reports of near misses of planes colliding as they depart and arrive at America's airports in the past year, is concerning and frankly unacceptable to all of us on this committee. We need to pass a comprehensive Federal Aviation Administration reauthorization bill that's currently sitting in the United States Senate to give the FAA and this administrator the tools they need to enforce safety rules and prevent catastrophe. In this very committee, we crafted a strong, bipartisan, 5-year FAA bill, and the House passed it nearly unanimously. We did our job, and now the Senate needs to do theirs as quickly as possible. Mr. Whitaker, as the FAA Administrator, you are the head of Aviation Oversight and Safety. I want to underscore what the ranking member has discussed here today in terms of oversight, particularly on production facility inspections, a crucial part of making sure our planes are safe. Section 521 of the House FAA reauthorization calls for the FAA to update the risk model used to inform frequency of these inspections, but we have problems right now. Can you, in a couple sentences, explain how the agency determines the frequency of these inspections and what impact these inspections have on production?
Thank you, sir. The agency uses a risk model with respect to manufacturers. It's a fairly uniform survey to identify the level of risk, and so how many inspections would be driven by that. That model will likely evolve based on the rollout of SMS systems, which should reduce risk and give us better insight into what's happening, and also in the case of Boeing, based on the culture survey that we expect to receive later this month.
I think I want to address another issue that was touched upon by our ranking member, and that is the recent trend of mishandled or damaged wheelchairs by aviation passengers. This recent trend of mishandled or damaged wheelchair incidents by commercial airlines raises serious concerns about the systemic barriers for passengers with disabilities. How is the FAA working to prevent these incidents and improve accessibility for air travel for people with disabilities?
Thank you, sir. The DOT has a large role in this related to how customers are treated on aircraft. So we work very closely in supporting DOT to make sure accessibility is an option and that innovations can happen to make sure that is enabled.
Okay, it's an important issue for us. We're going to hear a lot more from this committee on.
Yes, sir.
We need to up our game, if you will, in terms of improving the travel experience. On near misses, I mentioned, in response to the recent trend of runway near misses at some U.S. airports, the House passed FAA reauthorization would expand ground surveillance and detection equipment at large and medium hub airports. How would increasing the deployment of this technology help air traffic controllers and flight crews?
I think these near misses are one of those areas where there's a lot of ability to have tailored solutions for each airport. Every airport is different. It has its own challenges, but a lot of these surface awareness technologies or tools in the tower can really make the difference and create awareness to avoid these types of mishaps.
Thank you so much. In my remaining time, Administrator, I want to give a thank you. I want to thank you and the FAA for the collaborative partnership in helping Phoenix Mesa Gateway Airport expand its infrastructure to accommodate extraordinary growth. Gateway Airport is the busiest contract air traffic control tower in the region and contributes nearly $2 billion to our regional economy. They recently completed their new Terminal South concourse, due in part to $14.4 million in the bipartisan infrastructure law funds. A ribbon cutting will be held in a couple of weeks. The cooperation between the FAA and our Arizona delegation in Congress has been crucial to this growth, and I look forward to a continued strong working partnership to implement innovative ways to increase capacity at Gateway. With that, I thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stanton. Recognize the gentleman from Arkansas, Mr. Westerman, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Graves. Thank you, Administrator Whitaker over here. I want to follow up with my colleague, Mr. Perry's line of questioning. I know your whole testimony was basically about safety, and we all want safe airports. And Mr. Perry read to you from the manual about how a non-aeronautical purpose at an airport has to be approved by the FAA, and you stated that only one airport had approval to be used for the non-aeronautical purpose of housing migrants. Would you like to correct that answer, or is that the answer you want to stick by?
To my knowledge, and this is not an issue that I've only been there 3 months, not an issue I've spent much time on, but to my knowledge, there was only one application. It's also my understanding that applications are only involved if it's behind security. So other properties on airports don't come through our office for approval. It's really just behind security properties.
So it's well documented that many airports have been used for this purpose. So do you think these airports are in violation of any federal law, or do you think they found a way around that?
I assume they're in compliance. I have not heard otherwise, but our role is to make sure that the proper procedures are followed.
So this is an issue that I didn't think we would have to deal with in Congress. I chair the Committee on Natural Resources, and we've got a similar issue with National Park Service land where the administration has approved use of National Park Service land to build migrant shelters, which that's kind of crazy that you would think that that would even be an issue, but it has happened. And in researching the process, how that happens, it appears that maybe Secretary Mayorkas had a lot more to do with that than even the DOI secretary. Are you aware of any meetings between Secretary Mayorkas and Secretary Buttigieg to discuss issues of using FAA or using airports to house migrants?
I am not aware of any, no.
You aware of any meetings between other DOT or DHS officials to discuss this issue?
I am not.
Have you been in any meetings regarding this or phone calls?
Just getting briefed for this hearing. Otherwise, I have not had any meetings.
So is this, we sent a letter, Chairman Graves, Chairman of the full committee, I think 60 some odd members signed the letter last November asking about this issue. And as of today, we've still received no response. I know you're new, but why do you think we would be getting delayed on a response on this issue?
I don't know, but I'm happy to follow up afterwards, sir.
So you'll follow up, will you follow up with Secretary Buttigieg as well?
I'll follow up on the status of the letter, and I'll let you know.
All right. It's amazing that this is something that's been very well documented in the news, and there seems to be no response from the administration. And you, I know you're new again, but you have no real knowledge of what's going on here or the rules associated with it. So, yeah, if you would follow up with Secretary Buttigieg and tell him we're still waiting for his response. And, Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Mr. Chairman, I yield my time, remaining time to Mr. Nails.
Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Administrator, did you look at that letter that I referenced that was dated March 5th? You sent it to Cantwell and Ted Cruz?
Yes, I have that.
All right. Did you write that letter?
Did I write the letter?
Yes, sir.
No, it was drafted for me.
It was drafted for you. Who drafted it for you?
I don't know. It went through a process as this issue was developed internally to respond to requests for technical assistance on various issues
Okay.
with the reauth bill.
Is this letter the official position of the FAA to oppose the raising the mandatory retirement age without a study beforehand?
The official position is that we don't have a position on the retirement age, but if it changes, we'd like to have data to support the change.
Okay, so I want to be clear. So for everybody listening, the FAA, the administrator, does not have an official position on whether Congress, we passed it in the House, should raise the mandatory retirement age from 65 to 67.
Our role has been to identify issues around that, and we have identified two. One about international compliance, and then one about understanding the data of changing the age from 65 to 67.
Okay. Did ALPA influence your decision to write this letter? Did ALPA have any influence in the drafting of this letter, yes or no?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, I'll yield.
Gentleman yields back. My friend from Kansas, Ms. Davids, is recognized for questions.
Thank you. Thank you to Chairman Garrett Graves and to Ranking Member Cohen for this hearing today. And thank you also to Chairman Sam Graves and Ranking Member Larson for their leadership on passing a common sense bipartisan reauthorization of the Federal Aviation Administration in the House last year. Mr. Whitaker, welcome to the Aviation Subcommittee, and thank you for taking the time to be here. I do believe your experience and leadership will be invaluable at the FAA. I would like you to address an issue that's affecting the National Airspace System, which is aging infrastructure and functional obsolescence. The failure of the FAA's NOTAM system in January of 2023 highlights the risk to the flying public when aging, safety-critical aviation infrastructure isn't replaced in a timely way. And sadly, the FAA now operates and maintains one of the oldest collections of safety-critical aviation infrastructure in the world. One such system in the NAS desperately in need of replacement is ILS, or Instrument Landing Systems. There's a map up there. I've got one here. This ILS map demonstrates just how many 1970s era Mark 1F systems are in operation in the NAS. The FAA has more than 1,200 ILS systems located at hundreds of airports across the country. The ILS is the only system approved by FAA to support all-weather landings at the nation's busiest airports. As such, these systems are required to remain in operation for the foreseeable future. However, the vast majority of these safety-critical systems were placed into service in the 1970s and 80s and are now functionally obsolete. In Kansas alone, 17 of the 21 systems, which is 81%, are functionally obsolete. This body passed the bipartisan infrastructure law more than 2 years ago with a set-aside of $5 billion to replace these aging systems. But the FAA told industry leaders and members of this committee that modernization of these systems wasn't an eligible expense under the program. Then Aviation Chairman Larson and I subsequently engaged in a colloquy on the floor on December 9th of 2021, which is shown here, expressing congressional intent that this was in fact an eligible expense. This colloquy was shared with US DOT again on August 17th, 2022, when Mr. Larson and I noticed that there was no money directed in the fiscal year 2023 FAA spend plan for replacement of these systems. We asked for a timeline and budget detailing specific allocation of IIJA resources to landing and navigational aids equipment for fiscal years 22 through 26, which you can see here. The response we received, which is up now, contained none of the information that we asked for. In follow-up conversations with FAA, we have yet to receive a satisfactory response as to why the acquisition and modernization of these systems has lagged. In fact, several taxpayer-funded instrument landing systems, there's 14 of them, are sitting in a cave in Independence, Missouri, simply waiting to be installed. At the FAA's current pace of modernization, which is about 4 to 5 systems per year, it would take more than 100 years to replace these systems. This means that FAA expects many of these safety-critical systems to be in operation despite being over 100 years old. I can't imagine that's actually the expectation. And just so we're clear what system failure looks like, the most likely impact on these airports is on capacity, on throughput, and delays. When an ILS is out, runways can't be used for all-weather operations. But there's also this inherent safety risk should a system fail in the middle of landing operations. So, Mr. Whitaker, what's the FAA's schedule for deploying these devices system-wide? And as you might be aware, the professional aviation safety specialists have proposed a pilot program for deploying these systems within 18 months. And I'm curious if, to your knowledge, is the FAA considering that proposal?
Thank you for the question. You've hit on a very interesting issue at the FAA, which is how we fund facilities, equipment, and particularly we're in a situation now where we have a lot of redundant systems in the NAS and facilities. We have facilities that need to be replaced as well. With respect to this particular issue, my understanding is that infrastructure funding is available for deployment of those ILS systems, specifically the ones that you mentioned that are in storage. So my understanding is that will be deployed. Those funds will be used to begin deploying those systems.
Do you have a timeline?
I can certainly respond to your office with some specifics on the timelines.
Okay. I would very much like a specific response given the length of time that this has been going on. The bipartisan infrastructure bill gave us a 5-year timeline, and we're over 2 years in.
Yep.
I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davids. I recognize the gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Stauber, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Administrator Whitaker, thanks for being with us and congratulations.
Thank you.
Mr. Whitaker, how many positions are there at the FAA?
How many positions? Well, we have 45,000 employees.
45. And what percentage of those positions are filled?
I don't have an exact position number for you.
Is the COVID emergency over?
I believe so, yes.
May 11th, President Biden declared the emergency over. I understand you use a hybrid telework model. Is that correct?
It depends on the function. So obviously our controllers are all on the job, but other employees are still in a hybrid situation.
How many days a week do the employees have to show up in a 2-week work period?
The policy, again, it depends on the employee, but and the job description, but the baseline is 4 days.
Yeah, so 4 days, your employees have to, in a 2-week period, show up 4 days. What if our air traffic controllers only showed up 4 days in their work week? Would it affect commercial, general aviation?
Well, as I mentioned, they show up every day for their jobs.
I understand that. What I'm trying to get at is, what if our controllers just showed up 4 out of a 2-week work period, 4 days? Would that interrupt our work?
Well, they can't control traffic from home.
I understand that.
Certainly would.
You know what I'm getting at. If they only showed up, would it be a problem for our airports and general aviation, commercial aviation across our country? Yes or no?
Of course.
How do you track employee accessibility and productivity in this hybrid model?
It's up to individual managers to manage their workforce to meet the needs of their mission.
I can just tell you from what I'm hearing from stakeholders is that accessibility to FAA staff is limited. And it seems evident that productivity is waning as several high-profile rulemakings are still ongoing. And you know this, the rule for a regular beyond visual line of sight operation of unmanned aircraft systems. That final report was concluded in March of 2022, and now it's not expected until August of 2024. You know, and I know workplace flexibility is an important recruiting tool in our new world. However, as an agency with a safety mission first, do you find that a 2-day in-person work week rather low?
Again, it depends on the job position. So many of our employees, not only controllers, but inspectors need to be in place, but others, it may work for working remotely. So I think it depends on the position.
Mr. Administrator Whitaker, I believe that the FAA should hold itself to a higher standard. And the FAA's telework schedule requires, again, they are only in person 2 days, or correction, 4 days out of a 2-week work period. And I'd just like to point out again, our controllers are working a lot of hours, a lot of pressure on them to keep our flying public safe. And speaking of controllers, the National Airspace System Safety Review Team concluded that under the FAA's most recent controller workplace plan submitted to Congress, when retirements and other attrition is accounted for, the hiring plan produces a negligible improvement over today's understaffed levels, resulting in a net increase of fewer than 200 aircraft controllers by 2032. This is extremely concerning for safety and efficiency of the aviation system. Can you reassure the committee that the FAA will prioritize this issue, conduct maximum hiring of new controllers, and continue to request adequate resources from Congress to address the problem?
I can, yes, sir.
And I understand that the FAA has committed to maximum controlling hiring for only fiscal year 24, 25, and 26. Will the FAA commit to a longer-term maximum hiring posture, since it will take a lot longer than just 3 years for max hiring to return to healthy controller staffing levels?
We certainly commit to max hiring until we get healthy. What we've done is there are competing staffing models at play. So we've commissioned the Transportation Research Board to review those models. So within 3 years, we'll have a new model in place, and I will set those goals.
Thank you. Last question. Will you prioritize and support general aviation like you do commercial? And will you support rural airport investment and infrastructure?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And again, congratulations.
Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Stauber. Recognize the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you, Chairman, and welcome, Administrator Whitaker. As you know, Boeing recently withdrew its request for the MAX 7 to receive a safety exemption, which would have allowed the aircraft to be certified with a known defect. If granted, as you know, Boeing's fleet of MAX aircraft have an anti-ice system issue that could cause the nacelle, the pod surrounding the engine, to break and fall off in certain conditions. This could have potentially catastrophic consequences. Boeing is now working on a long-term fix that will require retrofitting the entire MAX fleet. How did the FAA, in your understanding, fail to detect such a defect during the certification of the MAX 8 and MAX 9 aircraft?
So my understanding on that particular issue is that potential defect was discovered using computer modeling some years after the original certification of the aircraft, and modeling that was required by the AXA legislation, actually. But that's my understanding of how that was discovered.
While I appreciate the FAA's attention to this topic, Boeing has demonstrated time and time again that it will cut corners on safety in order to maximize profits. My second question, Administrator, is this. In response to the recent Alaska Airlines accident, the FAA has launched an investigation into Boeing's compliance with manufacturing requirements. has the FAA comprehensively engaged with employee groups, those involved in the production, and those who have filed whistleblower reports regarding reduction of quality assurance procedures in the manufacturing system? And if so, how is the FAA handling these reports?
So on the engagement aspect, we now have 20 inspectors on the ground in Boeing engaging with the employees in every phase of the manufacturing process. And so this is to allow us to have direct conversations with employees about what pressures they might be feeling or what instructions they're getting and what incentives they're dealing with. On the whistleblower, we dedicated a portal for Boeing employees, but we also have a normal portal for whistleblowers. And we have a pretty regimented process on how we deal with those reports to make sure the identity is protected and the reports are taken seriously.
Should I take that to mean that there is currently engagement with those employees?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Of course, I look forward to working with the FAA to hold our aviation community to a higher standard of safety. It is equally crucial for the operation of our aviation industry that airport workers are paid livable wages. Airport workers are largely Latino, Black, and immigrant workforce. They've been overlooked and underpaid for the vital role that they play in keeping our airports running. My bill, the Good Jobs for Good Airports Act, would change that. Administrator, are you committed to doing what you can to ensure that the airports that the FAA oversees are delivering fair wages and benefits to all employees?
I'm very committed to making sure that they have a very safe working environment. Safety is my mandate, and we are focused on safety at airports, particularly on the ramp. So we've taken some initiatives around that to make sure that those employees are in a safe environment.
Thank you, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. I recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Whitaker. You know, you got a tiger by the tail. Yeah, I was going to speak on something else, and I am in a moment, but using airports for housing undocumented, that's a big deal. It's a big deal to the communities these airports are in. It's a big deal fiscally. It's a big deal for safety, and I know you're new, so I want to be fair, but we need you to drill down and tell us more what's going on. Please check thoroughly on this issue. I think it's a totally inappropriate use. Safety is our #1 issue. It was never meant for housing any of these airports. There was a plan, and this is fact. It was leaked out by a whistleblower, 10 different airports that they were going to house illegals in. Of course, we got a hold of it. And Atlantic City International Airport, in my district, they were talking about housing up to 60,000 illegals in a community of 35,000 to 40,000 people. That's wrong. So I need some commitments from you to thoroughly drill down on this issue, to know how many airports are involved, a complete list of airports that are involved, a policy coming from the FAA. We need a policy from the FAA dealing with these requests and ensuring that the FAA is part of the process in determining if, where, and when this is going to be done. And we need a complete list of requests and from whom it came. I brought this up to Secretary Buttigieg when he was here. He wasn't aware of it. Of course, we have the information. I need you to do that. I would appreciate if you get that information back to me and the entire committee. Could you commit to getting us that information?
I can commit to making sure that we're complying with the law around any approvals.
Mr. Whitaker, I appreciate that, but we really need...
We don't own the airports, so
I know, but it deals, but you're a very important part of what happens at the airport. You should be included. You should be part of it. The people, quite frankly, of our districts, of our country should be part of it as well. So I ask you to please think about that, and I would ask you to please commit to doing that. It's not a big request. It's a real obvious thing, and I'm looking forward to that report. You know, last month, the fuselage of a domestic Boeing 737 MAX exploded open at 16,000 feet. I know you're real aware of it. There are 180 people on board. We are unbelievably blessed that nobody died, that there weren't injuries, that it wasn't much worse than the result that we had. This accident, in my opinion, in my opinion, is the result of decades-long process of globalization. In the early 2000s, Boeing aggressively outsourced its business model. The strategy peaked in 2005 with the sale of the Wichita-based Spirit Aero Systems. I know you're aware of that. Spirit Aero is now a, quote, global corporation, and it has been identified by the FAA as responsible. You all identified it as responsible for the faulty components behind the Alaskan Airlines incident. This is one example of how Boeing's outsourcing has led to Boeing's decline. And Boeing has hidden its decline, in my opinion, and many, by appealing to diversity, equity, and inclusion, and for its investors, because it's a cool thing to be. And the investors that are interested in that were more likely to invest. And their stock, no doubt, has gone up 400% since their product has gone down, but their stock has gone up, which is real interesting. You know, you should be worried about safety when you're selling private equity firms, but they were not. This is a 1-2 punch of globalization and social engineering. It doesn't belong. Job number one is safety. Job number one is safety for every man, woman, and child that go in those airports. And it's a company that is struggling to reliably produce safe aircraft. Mr. Whitaker, are you concerned by the trajectory of Boeing as an American institution? An American institution. Are you concerned?
My concern is that Boeing makes safe aircraft, so I'm less concerned about externalities. I'm more concerned about the quality of the aircraft coming off the line, and that's our
Well,
focus.
I would maintain it's part and parcel. They have a job to worry about safety, efficiency, and when you're worried about all these other issues and not the green economy and everything else, you should, that should be your job number one. And I hope you have a plan to put them back on track. I sent you a letter in December about the FAA Technical Center, and I would like to submit this record for the Chairman, for the record. The needs include national airspace systems, electrical utilities, and technology transfer programs. My time has run out. I wish I had a half hour with you. I appreciate you being there. I would hope that you would take my request seriously because the American public takes it seriously, and I thank you and wish you good luck.
Gentleman's time has expired. Recognize the gentlelady from Alaska, Ms. Peltola, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Administrator Whitaker. General aviation accident rates in Alaska continue to outpace the rest of the country. Can you provide an update on FAA's implementation of the recommendations of the 2023 FAA Alaska Aviation Safety Initiative Tiger Team, including the 8 automated weather observing systems, installations scheduled to have been completed in September of 2023?
Thank you, ma'am. So I'm fully supportive of the unique nature of Alaska and the role of general aviation in that. I had a chance to visit when I was deputy and got to tour quite a bit of some of the remote facilities, and I think the FAST program has really been a very strong program, and we support that, and we'll continue to support that. On the AWAS, I know that I got briefed on this ahead of the hearing, and I understand that 7 of the 8 have been deployed. The 8th is inaccessible due to some flooding or some other climate conditions, so we will make sure that continues as well.
Okay, excellent. And as you say, Alaska is unique. I think 82% of our communities are not accessible by any other way except airplane. The FAA passed, or the House passed the FAA reauthorization bill, and it included Section 510, the Don Young Aviation Safety Initiative, which calls on aviation stakeholders to work together to reduce the rate of fatal accidents by 90% by 2033 in Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, and other American territories. And this provision includes a number of initiatives designed to further the objective, and I'm wondering what you see as steps that are necessary to achieve this kind of reduction.
Well, I think it's laudable that we have such an aggressive goal, and that is how we brought the commercial aviation accident rate down to its current level, and getting the stakeholder groups working together. I think with GA, there are a lot of technologies that can be deployed to create better situational awareness in the cockpit, and more tools, particularly around weather and unpredictable weather. but also redundancies around landing systems and the like. So I think this is an area where technology and quick deployment of technology can really be a benefit. So I think it's really positive that all these stakeholders are working together toward that.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Regrettably, I yield to Mr. Mann.
Thank you, and thank you for being here today, Administrator Whitaker. I represent the big first district of Kansas. There's a strong relationship between the Kansas economy and aviation. There are 91,000 jobs attributed to the aviation industry in my state, including 42,000 from the aerospace manufacturing segment. Aviation ranks second in economic impact in Kansas, only to agriculture. For our aviation industry to thrive, the FAA needs a roadmap of updated congressional priorities to adopt long overdue policy changes and regulatory requirements. Delays in rulemaking and insufficiencies in the workforce are bottlenecking the industry. It's imperative that Congress passes the reauthorization bill so the FAA, its workforce, and the aviation industry are able to address the backlog of concerns that my colleagues and I have all been raising for months so that America can return to its gold standard status in aviation. A few questions, Mr. Whitaker. We've heard a lot about the FAA's rulemaking process and the importance of it for innovation, safety, and international leadership. What will you do under your tenure to make this process more timely, transparent, and accountable?
Thank you, sir. I think transparency in general, I think, needs to be improved, and efficiency needs to be improved, delivering services, registrations, for example, certification process. So we are working on those issues. Rulemaking is a little different because it's driven by the Administrative Procedures Act, so we are required to have certain time periods for comment and certain process and procedures. I think the best we can do is make sure we get that transparency and know where we are in the process and try to keep the process moving. Rulemaking can have a dozen different steps in it, and just make sure that we're continuing to keep sunlight on that and keep things moving as quickly as we can within the confines of that law.
And then can you specifically address unmanned aerial systems? In other words, how is the FAA adapting its regulatory framework to accommodate the rapid evolution of unmanned aerial systems and advanced air mobility technologies? I think we got to acknowledge that this, is here to stay. It's a growing part of the aviation industry, tremendous potential for Kansas and the rest of the country. And how do we make sure the FAA is appropriately and quickly reviewing these new technologies with safety front and center, but also not having unnecessary delays as well?
Yeah, it is one of our big challenges, and right now I think it's mostly been dealt with in a one-off manner. So I think recently we've gotten much better on the small UAS and through this exemption process, so we've been able to satisfy a lot of the BVLOS operations and such. Advanced air mobility currently would have to operate under existing rules, which is doable but not scalable, if you will. So I think what we need to do is work as an industry with all stakeholders to develop that roadmap that integrates all these technologies and tries to keep up with their pace of development. So I think we don't want to be in the way, but we need to make sure that they're being deployed safely, and that's our top priority.
Yep, I agree. As an aside, I hear from multiple manufacturers in Kansas of all sizes that just talk about how long it takes for the FAA to respond to new ideas on how do we do things better, how do we innovate, how do we make sure that the U.S. continues, that we are the world leader in the aviation space. A big part of that, of course, is manufacturing. A big part of that is having an FFA that's adaptable, understands technology, understands where the industry's heading, and how do we partner together to promote safety. So, last question. In your testimony, you outlined several initiatives on increasing the air traffic controller workforce. What strategies are you implementing to bolster other fields in the aviation force, such as aircraft mechanics, pilots, other segments of the industry?
No, that's a great question, and I'm remiss for not mentioning that we're actually hiring in all these sectors. The controllers are sort of the most immediate safety need for us, but we're hiring in all sectors, and we're competing with all those other industries you just mentioned in a market that is a pretty good market if you're an employee. So I've often said I'm the chief recruiting officer for the agency, so we're doing direct outreach to schools, We're trying to cast as broad a net as we can to interest people into coming into the FAA. And maybe they come in for 30 years or maybe just 3 years. So we want to make it easier for folks to come through and have an experience there and then maybe go do something else afterwards. So it is a priority, and it's not an easy one to get after.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With that, I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mann. Gentlelady from Nevada, Ms. Tidy's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nice to see you, Mr. Whitaker, and congratulations on having this position. It's going to be a tough job and a tough place, but I know you're up to it, and we appreciate it very much. You know, aviation is so important to my district, Las Vegas. We've got a very crowded airspace with the military, with the drones, with the commercial flights, with the general aviation. So this is really critical, and I want to thank y'all for your recent investments from the bipartisan infrastructure law. You brought $49 million for the infrastructure grant funding for all the airports in my district, and that's really helpful and really appreciated for improving runway safety and taxi upgrades. But I'd like to go back to the issue of the air traffic controllers. We know that air travel is increasing, and yet the number of air traffic controllers is not. I think you hired 30 last year, including trainees. And they're often forced to work overtime 6 days a week, and that leads to stress and burnout. And would you just say again for the record how you're trying to address that issue?
You've identified all the problems that I've also identified coming in, and it's, I think, one of our most pressing needs. And I would add to that, it takes years to make an air traffic controller. Yeah. It's a long journey. It's not an easy job. It's a very rewarding job, but we need to hire as many as we possibly can. So we are ensuring that our own process is delivering as many as it can through the academy in Oklahoma City. But we also want to work with universities in the private sector to make sure we're able to pull as many from that source as well. So we've become more flexible with military hires. It used to be twice a year, so if you didn't happen to leave the military at just the right time, you had to wait 6 months. We now have a constant hiring of military controllers, which will increase the number of folks who can go directly into the towers or centers. And we're working, I think one of our most promising outlets will be these aeronautical colleges and universities, where the students can get the exact same curriculum as the academy, and then go directly into it, pass the exam, and go directly into a tower or radar facility. So going forward, that will allow us to really increase the pipeline. But in the short term, it's going to be hard to, because it takes so long, it's going to be hard to move that needle very much, at least till you get about 2 years out.
I think there's a place in some of the community colleges for developing programs like this.
I think that could certainly be eligible if they're able to teach that curriculum and have the training tools. It often requires being around a lot of retired controllers. They have a relatively early retirement age. A lot of them become instructors afterwards. So, but I think I'd like to really see that program expand as we go forward.
Thank you. Yeah, me too. If we can be helpful, let us know. Also, we're seeing more and more in different modes of transportation that companies are acting in ways that tend to prioritize profits over safety. And you mentioned in your testimony that the agency found inspections of the grounded 737-9 MAX aircraft showed Boeing's quality system issues were, and I quote, unacceptable and required further scrutiny. Do you have confidence in your suppliers that they can kind of maintain this quality control? It's not a fox guarding the hen house kind of situation?
Well, I think we're going to look at this process really top to bottom to see where the incentives are, where the failures are in the system, and we're going to demand that quality come up to the appropriate schedule. We certify aircraft to be built to very specific specifications, and they have to be built to those specifications. So regardless of their other motives, they're not going to be able to build more airplanes until they meet those standards.
Okay. You don't see a problem with conflict of interest with self-inspections?
We are looking at that specifically. We've asked MITRE, our research firm, to give us options on delegation and where we might bring in a third party, for example, in quality control or quality assurance, to make sure you have a neutral set of eyes on some of those issues. So that is something we're looking at.
Thank you. And then just in a second, to throw out there about the framework for beyond line of sight. Now it's based on a waiver system. We want to put those rules in place. Are you moving forward with that?
We're gonna move as quickly as we can on that one.
Okay.
Yes.
A lot of people want you to move a little more quickly.
I've been getting that message, thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Titus. Gentleman from Utah, Mr. Owens, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of the Westerners, Utah is a remarkable place of conversions and connections. Fastest growing state in the union right now. We have the Olympics possibly, inland ports. So it's going to be very important that we have that conduit coming from places, a hub like Utah. That being said, the FAA has identified multiple time blocks where the DCA airport is currently underutilized. Do you believe more flights can be added safely and efficiently to that process?
So our focus with respect to DCA is whether it's safe. So we're not involved in the decision around where the flights can go from DCA. So our focus is entirely on the safety aspect. It is an airport that is very close to capacity. There are some hours when there's some room for new capacity, but it is, as you know, a pretty full operations. It tends to operate at around 60 operations an hour, sorry. So it's basically one a minute, so you can't really squeeze much more than that in there. So that tends to be where our focus is.
Well, according to some of the reports we got from the FAA, there are blocks in which it can be effectively done safely, according to the FAA report.
Well, we will always make sure it's operating safely.
Okay.
If something suffers, it'll be efficiency.
Okay. Outside the perimeter are tens of millions of Americans who deserve better pricing, better value, and more convenient access to D.C. representatives. I encourage you to support the efforts to provide a consumer-free market to our nation's capital. I would really appreciate that. In my hometown airport, Salt Lake City, is currently phase 2 of a 3-part, $5 billion development. Can you explain the impact of the delayed FAA reauthorizations of Salt Lake City International and airports like that are going through modernization?
Yes, I think you're hitting on a very important point. These projects have a certain momentum, and they need to be funded, and they need to operate under current authorization. So I think it's vital that both of those pieces happen.
Okay. I'm going to yield my remaining time to my good friend from Texas, Mr. Hill.
Thank you. And I apologize, Mr. Administrator. These wonderful gentlemen give me their time when they don't have anything else to say. And I've got so much to talk about with you. So just for the record here, I asked you, did you write this letter? And you stated you didn't, but you had somebody ask you to write this letter. Can I ask you who asked you to write this letter dated February 5th?
So I think the discussion probably would have been with our government affairs team that focuses on providing technical assistance on legislation.
But you couldn't specifically, somebody come up to you and said, hey, Mr. Administrator, I'm drafting this letter. I want you to approve this letter so we can send out to Senators Cantwell and Cruz?
No, it comes through a correspondence. We put out a lot of correspondence, and the last 4 weeks I've been mostly busy on other topics.
Okay, so it was written by, your opinion, some government affairs team within the FAA?
Presumably, but I don't know precisely, but that normally would be how it would be developed.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. You did state that, I bring this letter up, and you stated that it is not the official position of the FAA to oppose raising the retirement age to 67, but you have some concerns, and in the letter it talks about we always prioritize a robust process to identify risk and ensure mitigations to maintain safety, but we do not test in a live environment. We do not test in a live environment. Could you tell us what that means? The members up here, what the hell's a live environment? Explain that to me.
I think I believe what that means is we don't change a rule to see how it plays out. We usually like to do the research before we change a rule.
Okay. Would you consider, are you familiar with Basic Med? Basic Med, the study, the Basic Med safety study? All right. The FAA authorized it. They let it run. They looked at it after 3 years, like 2017, 2018, 2019, and they reported back to Congress. It's right here. I have it here. An FAA report submitted to Congress, as required, on March 10th, reviewed 3 years of general aviation data and concluded that the Basic Med program is safe. Isn't that a live study? I mean, they were flying around. These general aviators are flying around. They're looking at whether it's a third-class medical versus a basic med, and they found out that basic med works. That is a live study. Would you agree?
Yeah, that was based on a legislative mandate.
Yeah, but I know it's a legislative mandate.
We don't refuse
that is a live study, though. I mean, come on, how could you not agree with that? They're flying around and they're reporting back 3 years of data, and they're saying, hey, there's no issues with basic med. That's a live study.
Right.
Okay, just want to get that, because it says we do not test in a live environment. That's not true. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Nels. Recognize Mr. Carbajal for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Administrator Whitaker. Prior to the Alaska Airlines 1282 accident, did the FAA find any evidence of persistent quality control lapses in any of Boeing's production lines?
So recognizing that to answer that question, a lot of that is before my tenure, but I think the production problems with the 787 beginning in 2019 through recently are pretty well known. And even just in December, we had an airworthiness directive around a loose bolt on a rudder system. So I think there were already some recent reports of production issues with Boeing.
Not to hammer on that, but you did mention some bolt issues recently. Has the FAA become aware of any other lapses since the start of the investigation?
So the investigation is ongoing, and we're supporting NTSB in their investigation, of course, of the incident itself. So there are no findings really to discuss at this point. The audit investigation is going on, and the only thing I can say about that, it hasn't shown any findings that have led us to immediate action. So we're just going to take the data we get from that and analyze that to decide how to move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Whitaker, one of the FAA's most successful government industry partnerships is the Contract Tower Program. 262 smaller airports participate in this critically important air traffic safety program, including 21 in California, one of which is in my district, the San Luis Obispo County Airport. This critical air traffic safety program is important to maintain and develop regional service and supports DoD flight training operations and military readiness as a pilot flight schools all across the country. It is also important to note that contract towers account for approximately 1/3 of all tower operations in the nation, and about 70% of contract controllers are veterans. Mr. Administrator, what assurances can you give me and my colleagues that contract towers will remain a priority for you?
Well, I can assure you that we certainly support the program, and given the hiring challenges we're having with air traffic controllers, no incentive to try to tinker with the system as it's working. And in fact, we also do hiring from contract towers as well, so it's a source for our own controllers. So we're fully supportive of the program and want to make sure it's working, particularly in smaller airports.
Great. Also, staffing shortages continue to be a challenge throughout the industry, which you just now touched on, including contract towers. What measures can the FAA and the industry undertake collaboratively to address staffing challenges at these towers?
I think we're doing all that we can do from our that we've been able to think of for our own hiring purposes. But I think it's become a very competitive market. There are a lot of new entrants in different aspects of aerospace. So I think we just have to really compete for those employees and give them a good working environment.
Thank you. I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate you recently becoming the administrator, and I think you have your hands full with a lot of challenges, but I think you're the right person for the job, and I just wanted to recognize you for all that you bring to the table to this very important position, and all the problem solving that you're going to help us achieve. So thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Carbajal. Recognize the gentlelady from Oregon, Ms. Chavez-Reimer.
Thank you, Chairman. Nice to meet you, sir.
Nice to meet you. Thanks.
I represent Oregon's 5th Congressional District, and I'm grateful to be on this committee to ask these questions. So I'll get right started. Long delays and cancellations have become too common in airports, in large part due to the shortage of pilots. It would be ridiculous for us to look at the current state of things and say, everything is fine. Let's just keep the status quo. Last week, through my work on Education and Workforce Committee, the Flight Education Access Act was included in major student loan reform package. This is a huge step in resolving that shortage. The common sense proposal closes the pilot workforce gap by letting prospective pilots access the same loan opportunities available to students at traditional four-year schools. It increases the total maximum amount of the federal direct and subsidized Stafford loans an eligible dependent may borrow to $11,000, increases the maximum amount for independent students to $137,500, and increases the maximum amount of federal direct Stafford loans to a total of $65,000. Mr. Administrator, if prospective pilots could access these types of student loans and use them when completing the FAA's regulated training, would that help improve the pilot shortage?
I think that would be a very useful initiative. It is very expensive to become an airline pilot, which means 1,500 hours. So you can become a private pilot with as few as 40 hours. So getting from 40 to 1,500 is a hugely expensive endeavor. So it's like any other profession, doctor, lawyer, plumber. It costs money to get there, and
so you would agree it's a positive outcome.
Absolutely.
This would be a positive initiative to move
Absolutely.
forward. So moving on, what should be the most common part of air travel safety? Of course, you've heard plenty about the Boeing Alaska accident today, and amongst others, but it is not lost on me is that it happened in Oregon, my home state. Oregonians, we choose Alaska Airlines as their preferred airline, and I fly on them every single week, back and forth. Boeing jets rightfully have cause for concern and many questions. Can you speak to the level of confidence, once again today, in the FAA-approved inspection steps for the 737-9 MAX door plug?
Yes, I think that was a very thorough inspection process, and the mechanical fix to that defect, we have a high level of confidence that takes care of the problem.
And so you'd fly on the 737-9 MAX?
Yes, I would.
Congressman Carbajal talked on my last question on the contract tower program, and I have one of those in my district in Bend. So I appreciate you answering that you are in full support of continuing that. So I will yield my time then to my colleague, Mr. Nels, the remaining time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Administrator, obviously this letter that you did not write, but you had the government affairs team write, I believe. And listen, you're a busy man. I don't think maybe you proofread this thing very clearly. I mean, there's some issues here as it relates to but we do not test in a live environment. I believe that basic med safety study is a prime example, and I have a few more, I believe, it's interesting. ALPA is taking dues from pilots in Canada over the age of 65. ALPA is taking dues from pilots over the age of 65, and we know ALPA they want to squash us. They don't want this retirement age range. WestJet is flying ALPA-represented pilots over the age of 65 right now. That is your live study, Mr. Administrator. That is your live study. Let's talk about the Part 135 operators. We allow pilots to fly over the age of 65 under Part 135. Is that not a live environment? Could you explain to everybody up here what a Part 135 is versus a 121?
A Part 135 carries a carrier typically under 30 passengers.
Sure.
Or less, yeah.
NetJets would be an example?
That's correct.
All right. Do Part 121 and 135 share the same airspace?
They do.
They do. So they taxi with Part 121, i.e. the big airliners, folks, Delta, United, everything, and you can get this NetJet. Taylor Swift flying to the Super Bowl in her supersonic jet. They could be in the same airspace, taxiing on the same runway. Why do Part 135 that flies around the millionaires and the billionaires across the country, why can they fly to the age 67, but United and Delta, that gentleman, we fire him at 65? How does that make any sense?
Congress passed a law limiting them to 65.
Congress passed a law limiting them to 65.
Right.
How do you feel about that? Do you think that's just, it's right?
I think it's what Congress did, so we don't second guess Congress. But I think our point was if you're going to change it, we'd like to have some data around that.
I think that's perfect. I yield back.
Thank you, Sheriff. For the record, I'm not sure that Taylor Swift flies supersonic. Just want to make note. Gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Auchincloss, recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. And I want to second what the chairman said about the imperative for the Senate to pass the FAA reauthorization. This committee did good work, bipartisan work, and it needs to happen in the Senate now. Mr. Whitaker, you were earlier getting questions from my Republican colleagues about migrant housing at the airports. By statute, FAA has jurisdiction over airside, not landside operations at airports, correct?
That's correct, sir.
And there is one instance of the airside of an airport asking to house migrants, correct?
That's my understanding.
And there has been no documentation of airside safety being impeded at that one airport, JFK, correct?
That is the standard, yes.
And is the FAA an aeronautical safety organization or is it an immigration agency?
Our mission is safety, sir.
The hardworking men and women of Border Patrol, which actually is this government's immigration agency, have endorsed the Senate's bipartisan deal on border security, which is a tough and fair compromise to address the migrant surge. And if my Republican colleagues are so concerned about solving this problem, I suggest that they stop asking you, sir, for answers and start asking Speaker Johnson for answers. And question number one might be, are you Donald Trump's campaign manager or are you Speaker of the House? Sir, back to your job. You authorized the MAX airplane to fly again after the Alaska Airlines accident. Why do you believe the MAX airplane is now safe?
So the MAX 9 was grounded because of concerns about the quality of manufacturing for the plug door. So the focus of that airworthiness directive was to inspect those aircraft and come up with a repair that would ensure that it met the standard of safety built into the certification of the aircraft. Once that inspection and repair scenario was agreed upon, then the aircraft was allowed to return to service.
Now, in 2020, you took back, not you, but the FAA took back airworthiness ticketing from Boeing. What did that do for oversight of Boeing then, and was that oversight sufficient given the problems it has had at factories regarding the MAX 9?
So I wasn't there at the time, as you noted. I guess I would say in retrospect, and given what happened with the plug door, it's hard to call that oversight sufficient. So we're looking at that process and what additional steps need to be taken to make sure that that oversight is sufficient.
Last August, the FAA announced almost $45 million in funding for Boston Logan International Airport to simplify the airfield layout and reduce the risk of runway incursions. Can you speak to how investments like that will improve passenger safety and any other work the FAA is doing to reduce the risk of near misses?
So issues that happen in the airport environment and on runways, each airport is unique. It has its own geometry, and certain geometries create natural situations that can cause confusion. So trying to, and we call them hotspots, trying to identify those hotspots and correct them either through signage, lighting, or sometimes moving taxiways is highly effective in keeping them safer. So the good news about these type of events is there are really straightforward solutions, and we've been deploying those solutions.
I want to join my colleagues in saying how happy we are to have you in this position, how qualified I think you are for this job, and looking forward to seeing the work that you can do for maintaining and improving America's gold standard reputation for airline safety.
Thank you.
Yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Auchincloss. Recognize the Vice Chair of the Subcommittee, the gentleman from Indiana, Mr. Yakin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator Whitaker, for being here today. After a robust, open, and transparent and bipartisan process, the House passed its FAA reauthorization last July in an overwhelming 351-69 vote. And it appears we're finally going to see some welcome movement from our colleagues in the Senate later on this week. Hopefully that means we can soon provide certainty and stability to your agency, to the aviation community, and to the flying public with an FAA reauthorization centered around our gold standard of safety and continued American aviation leadership. But it's that leadership I'd like to speak about today, or in this particular case, the lack thereof. As we held hearings in the lead up to our FAA reauthorization bill, we heard from witnesses, especially in the drone delivery industry, who said that they were expanding in markets like Australia instead of the United States due to a lack of regulatory certainty. I've been encouraged to see the FAA in recent months issuing a number of Part 107 waivers that enable beyond visual line of sight operations for drone delivery companies. The waivers represent another step in a long journey that must strike that fine balance between safety and forward momentum. But it's a journey that, in my estimation, has been moving far too slow. Mr. Whitaker, earlier you told my colleague, Chairman Graves, that the BVLOS notice of proposed rulemaking will be published, quote, this year. Last September, an FAA official had pegged that timeline at August of 2024. Is that timeline slipping, or is August still the goal?
I can look, if you like, I'll give you a specific answer. I was covering for my lack of memory on an exact date, so.
Yeah, I would like a specific answer if you don't mind.
I'll just circle back with you. I will give you a precise answer. I just don't recall.
Great. I would like a precise answer on that. And furthermore, if the timeline from August, which was told, or an FAA administrator told, or official told back in September, if that timeline from August is slipping, I would like to have you circle back and articulate why within the FAA that timeline is slipping. And then my second question is, once that notice is published, are you able to commit to publishing a final rule within 12 months of the notice of proposed rulemaking?
I can commit to keeping the rule moving as quickly as possible. It depends on what comments come in, how they get arbitrated, and then it has to go through a review process, as you know, up through OIRA. But we will give as much transparency as possible and try to keep that moving as much as possible. I think it's an important rule, and we want to get it out.
Right. I agree with you. It is an important rule, and it's one that, due to so many delays in timelines, we have companies who are reevaluating their innovation, their R&D right here in the United States. We want companies to continue to make those investments here in the United States.
I agree, yes.
Thank you for your commitment to moving forward. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to my colleague, Mr. Nels.
Thank you, sir.
Nels.
So we've talked about this letter. We've talked about the fact that I don't believe it was proofread, sir. I really don't. You seem to be a great guy. I think you have a bright future, but this letter is full of inaccuracies. It has flaws. It says we don't test in a live environment, but I don't believe you believe that. I just think that that's not what you believe, and I think we can point that out. The last sentence of the letter, it says, quote, "It is critical to provide the agency an opportunity to conduct research and determine mitigations." You talk about conducting research. Everybody that's listening, watching, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, our friends to the north, Canada, all have pilots above the age of 67. They've had no safety issues. Zero, no safety issues. The head of the FAA in New Zealand, I went up to ICAO. I flew up to Canada, went to the ICAO meeting. The FAA administrator of New Zealand said they have pilots flying up to the age of 75, and they have no issues. That's your live study, sir. Call them. Ask them. I even got, believe it or not, John Prater, the former president of Airline Pilots Association. It says, in the past, reference 60 to 65, in the past, commercial airline pilots who did not want to stop working at age 60 took jobs with international airlines or charter operators for which the retirement age was higher. The experience of these pilots should also be studied, said John Prater, president of ALPA. Quote, "You can look globally, look at Canada, and look at pilots flying in corporate aviation and on-demand services like NetJets." He says, referring to a large private aviation, "The GAO could expand and ask the airlines themselves. That's the avenue they could investigate if they choose to expand their look," end quote. I yield.
Thank you, Sheriff. Recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Allred.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this hearing. It's on an incredibly important topic at an important time. And thank you, Mr. Administrator, for being here. I know that we're all united in wanting to restore confidence in our air travel. You know, when we have some Americans travel quite a bit, as we all do. And I was sitting next to some folks the other day who were saying that they were filtering out in their travel plans the planes that they think are unsafe. And when we have that, we know that we have to respond. And so we have to respond together. Here on our responsibility is to help you to ensure that we remain the gold standard. And you certainly have my commitment on that. And I wanted to just ask you about, in reference to Boeing's internal oversight, you stated that it's time to re-examine the delegation of authority and assess any associated safety risks. Can you discuss how the FAA intends to change oversight at the manufacturing sites to meet this goal?
So what we're doing a number of things. We're doing an audit of the manufacturing process. We are looking into what is delegated, what could be overseen by a third party. And we have inspectors on the ground talking to employees to understand sort of the ground truth, if you will, of what's happening, what the pressures are. And based on that outcome, we will look at putting together a program to continue to add direct oversight to what otherwise was sort of an auditing approach, so a much more hands-on approach going forward. That'll be really designed after this 6-week audit period is finished and we have a better understanding of what's going on in the factory.
And do you need any further authorizations or support from the Congress in order to do that? Is there anything in the FAA reauthorization that would assist in that?
Well, I do appreciate you saying that the willingness to work together. I do think with a problem like this, we all need to be rowing in the same direction. Congress, Boeing, the airlines, the FAA. I think we all want the same outcome, which is safe airplanes. So we will certainly come back with you on that. I think we do anticipate needing to hire more inspectors. The oversight before was a different skill set, and we need folks who are trained to be on the ground and much more hands-on. So we do anticipate some hiring. I think we have the authorizing authority to do that. We may need to find the money to do it, but I think that'll be a top priority, and we'll either come back for that or we'll make it work one way or the other.
Because there's an inherent tension here between competition, the need to rush products to market. I remember back when we dealt with the MAX initially, a few years back, some of the internal discussions about needing to compete when you're also your own regulator or doing your own internal reviews. And so it seems to me that we have to have more on our side in terms of independent investigators. And I recognize the cost associated with that, but I think that for the American flying public, it's a cost that's worth us bearing in terms of making sure that we don't have another incident like what we had. And so in order to have a truly safe system, it seems to me that we can't rely on the manufacturers themselves to be their own watchdogs. Is that something you would agree with?
I certainly agree that the current system is not working because it's not delivering safe aircraft. So we have to make some changes to that. And I think we also have to look at the culture. To your point, incentives drive behavior, and I think maybe we need to look at the incentives to make sure safety is getting the appropriate first rung of consideration that it deserves.
Yeah, I mean, I played in the NFL, and if they'd let us be our own referees, you know, every time an offensive lineman tried to block me, it would have been a holding call. You know what I'm saying? So I think this is certainly something we should work on. I wanted to come really quickly to the announcement that you just issued about the installation of the first modernized tower simulation system for traffic controller training in my state, Austin Bergstrom International Airport. Can you elaborate how this technology will benefit our controller workforce that's already stretched so thin?
So these simulators, they're in a way a simple technology. It's a circle of screens that really reproduces the environment of that particular airport and allows controllers to train on that environment. So that works for new controllers, but also if you have a system, if you have a problem at your airport, for example, a hotspot area, or some other persistent problem that we've identified, existing controllers can actually train to that problem in that simulator. So it can be thrown at them as a situation to see how they respond and becomes a learning tool. So it's really important for current training, but also for helping move controllers fast through the training process.
That's great. Well, thank you so much. I yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Allred. Recognize the gentleman from New York, Mr. Molinaro.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Whitaker. We welcome your leadership. It goes without question. The FAA, in at least my estimation, and many others, has been in need of leadership, and certainly FAA reauthorization, critically important. We're hopeful the Senate moves earnestly and that we can move that bill to law. Without question, Americans have witnessed too many alarming incidents, from aircraft employee treatment to aircraft safety and passenger experience. I appreciated participating in the briefing last week regarding the door plug incident, and look forward, obviously, to the NTSB report and FAA's reaction and response. On the topic of safety, I was very happy to see in your testimony a reference FAA rulemaking on drug and alcohol testing for foreign repair stations. One of the first bills I introduced was the Global Aircraft Maintenance Safety Improvement Act, which ensures parity of safety protocols between domestic and foreign aircraft maintenance. You're familiar with. I'm very happy to say this provision has been included in the House-passed FAA reauthorization, and I'm hopeful that it will remain a part of final law. In the area of, in particular, both the treatment of aircraft employees and passenger experience, supporting mental health and breaking down barriers is a top priority of many of ours. It's why I joined Chairman Garrett Graves, in urging the FAA to modernize its mental health protocols and take immediate steps to dismantle barriers that discourage individuals from seeking care. I do appreciate in your testimony that you referenced the FAA's Mental Health and Aviation Medical Class Aviation Rulemaking Committee. I certainly, as do others, urge swift release of the report that comes from that committee, and ask, sir, for your commitment here today in supporting making mental health and the treatment, in particular, of aircraft employees a top priority within FAA's regulatory environment.
Yes, sir, it is a top priority, and I think it's long overdue to update the approach to mental health and just treat these as health issues and have a clearer path to treatment and get people back in the cockpit as quickly as possible.
Yeah, we certainly acknowledge the rise in mental health concerns across America. They are made even more dangerous in confined environments like aircraft, and certainly men and women who are flying or participate in keeping us safe in that arena deserve adequate care. So I certainly look forward to the progress and urge swift action. Another question that I just wanted to touch on as it relates to advanced air mobility, a topic that we all have focused on pretty acutely. Can you provide us timing on the powered lift SFAR? As far as you know, the FAA committed, as far as I know, committed to completing it in 2024. I'm certainly interested, as in others, in hearing your insights and hearing what stage of development the SFAR is in.
So that rule is under development, and we do expect a final rule by the end of the year.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker. I want to reinforce my support of your efforts. In response to a comment and question from my colleague from Massachusetts, I just would note the FAA, when it desires to, has a great deal of influence on landside activity at airports. Having managed one, I know that firsthand. And certainly when there needs to be FAA clarity, I encourage it. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Nails.
Thank you again, sir. In the letter, again, it is critical to provide the agency an opportunity to conduct research and determine mitigations. We talk about the research. I mentioned to you, sir, and thank you for being here, I mentioned you Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Canada. They are all operating with pilots over the age of 67. Do you think it would be a good idea to maybe reach out to those countries and ask them, hey, how's it working for you? Canada to the north? I mean, any issues with this? I mean, we're all human beings. Any issues? Do you think that would be maybe a good idea to try to help accomplish what you ask for in this letter, to conduct research and determine mitigations?
Certainly, if the legislation is passed, we will look at that option.
Yes, I think it's very, very important because it's all there for you. I talk a little bit about the 135s, right? These Part 135 operators that are flying the millionaires and billionaires. A lot of people can't fly that in this room here. They're flying around the millionaires and the billionaires, and those pilots can be 67 years old. And the FAA is okay with that, correct? I mean, they can fly 67 years old and fly the millionaires and billionaires in the same airspace. And Brosi argued with me on that one. The output president said, oh, no, they don't operate in the same. He's not being truthful. They fly in the same airspace. You would agree with that?
Do I agree that they fly in the same airspace?
Yes.
They do, yes.
So how can we allow pilots to be 67 to fly the millionaires and the billionaires, but not allow Delta, United, and American to do it when we know we have a pilot shortage?
We don't set these age limits. The Congress does that.
I know it. We're going to fix it. We're going to fix it today.
Thank you, Sheriff. Recognize the patient gentlelady from California, Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate that. Welcome, Mr. Administrator. Thank you for being here. Last week, we learned again about Spirit Aerospace, and they incorrectly drilled holes in the fuselage. I'm wondering if you know at this point in time, has FAA determined how many aircraft were delivered to customers with these problems, and what actions are being taken to address this newest problem with Boeing and its supplier?
So we're working with Boeing to understand what happened here, and so we're investigating that piece of it. These are small rivets that hold a window in place. So likely what that means is we know it's not to compliance, so we want to understand why it has not been manufactured per design, and then we'll see what corrective actions need to be taken to repair the windows and when that has to happen.
I'm talking about incorrectly drilled in the fuselage, that they had drilled holes that were too close to the edge.
Yeah, those were around a window holding.
Oh, they okay.
Yeah, in the fuselage.
Okay, very good, very good. The House FAA reauthorization bill would create a new deputy administrator for safety and operations to engage in the certification and operational approval of life-saving technologies. Can you share your thoughts on how technology will improve aviation safety and how you would use the new deputy administrator role to further advance technologies?
I think that technology has been one of the great tools that we've had to reduce the accident rate in aviation. And I think there's a lot of benefit in expanding what's available, particularly into GA aircraft, to provide more situational awareness in the cockpit. I think the focus needs to be looking at ways to bring that kind of technology to market as quickly as possible, recognizing the positive impact that it has on safety. So I could see that role being helping to facilitate that action.
So the deputy administrator would be really responsible to trying to really prioritize this within the organization?
I think we always want to prioritize safety, but it would be an additional resource to have perhaps quicker implementation.
Great. Thank you for that. The FAA and PASS, the Professional Aviation Safety Specialists, have been in collective bargaining for over 2 years now. What's the status of that?
My understanding is that the vast majority of terms have been agreed. There are, as happens in these types of things, a handful that are still outstanding. We're committed to working as quickly as possible to try to get to final resolution.
I understand that following the January 24th FAA approval of the 737 MAX 9 inspection plans, both Alaska and United began to return aircraft to service. Do you know how many aircraft remain to be inspected, and have you heard from these airlines what their total estimated losses have been since the original grounding?
I don't have any information on the financial impact of this. I'm sure they're dealing directly with Boeing. As far as the number of aircraft returned to service, I think it's been about 90% so far. I don't have a precise number, but most of them have been returned to service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
You didn't want to yield your time to the gentleman from Texas?
I thought about it, but I thought I would pass.
Thank you, Ms. Brownlee. Recognize the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Kane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I would like to thank Administrator Whitaker for being here today. Runway safety is a critical aspect of aviation. And many runway instances and near misses have been reported over the past year, and you outlined in your testimony the actions the FAA has taken to address these risks. What are some of the challenges you still face in addressing such safety risks?
I think we don't have a lot of direct barriers other than sort of capacity of manpower. So we've dispatched runway safety teams to virtually every major airport in the country to review the geometry of the airport and to assess what technologies might be helpful, whether it's as simple as lightings or signs or a more complex surface awareness technology. It's the surface awareness technology in the tower that's the most helpful, and I think that's sort of the long pole in the tent at this point.
Okay. How is the FAA addressing workforce challenges, particularly in terms of acquiring and maintaining the expertise necessary for certifying new technologies, such as unmanned aircraft systems and advancing air mobility technology?
So these new technologies do present challenges for us on the certification side. There are a lot of new systems, a lot of new capabilities that are new to aviation. So bringing in the right workforce to work those issues is an ongoing challenge. We're competing with all these companies out there that are developing those technologies, but we're working to make sure we have those resources in place.
What is the FAA doing to ensure that the agency is ready to fully implement the FAA reauthorization legislation, which the Senate has yet to act on when it's signed to the President and enacted into law? Are you doing anything to anticipate your reauthorization in-house?
Are you talking about the new legislation coming in? So when that legislation is complete, we have a process that we'll run to identify the projects for us that come out of that and set up a sort of a program management approach so that we are tracking those, trying to meet the deadlines. And if the deadlines are not achievable, communicating that as quickly as possible. But I think the key will be open communication with the committee.
If I may, I would recommend there's got to be broad agreement, as you can see, and this administration must be able to see between what this committee and this chamber, as well as what the Senate is looking at, that you can anticipate what's coming in a number of areas.
Right.
So I would anticipate, if I may, if you can also anticipate some of this efforts.
Yes, sir.
And with that, I will yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Nels from Texas.
Thank you, sir. In your early testimony, you talked about you established I think it was an independent safety review team for the Boeing situation. Is that correct? To look at Boeing?
There was an independent safety review team established last year before I came in response to near misses.
Sure.
And they put out a report in November.
Mm-hmm. And I'm all about safety. I know you are. Everybody in America wants to have. We got the greatest aviation. I mean, our reputation is rock solid. We are safe. We have done a very good job in this country as it relates to aviation safety. Could you consider asking a group like that to go review some of the records from Japan, New Zealand, Canada, to look at it? I mean, it's a safety review team. Get the records. Ask them, hey, tell us a little bit about your history over here and your programs and having these pilots at 67 flying around up to 70. How's it working out? Don't you think that would be very useful information, not only for Congress here, but for the FAA, the administrator specifically?
If that legislation does raise the age, we will certainly look at all the tools available.
Absolutely, and I think that's fantastic, even with the Part 135s. I mean, are you aware of any issues related to Part 135s? I mean, has your office received phone calls about potential issues related to all the 135 operators that are flying right now while we're having this conversation? You get all the data, don't you? I mean, are you a receptacle of a lot of the complaints and the data safety regulations as it relates to Part 135?
We would certainly look at that data as part of that.
Do you feel that, I mean, are you aware of any issues with these pilots flying around in the same airspace as Delta at age 67 with the Part 135?
I have not looked at the data to see if there are any issues around that.
I think, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. I'll take a moment of personal privilege here. Stafford to my right keeps screwing up this list. I've had enough of this, and so we're going to go ahead and fire him. Seriously, to my right is Chris Sen, who has served in our military, got a master's in aviation and new entrance in the market, has a law degree, and has been an incredible asset to this committee as we've gone through and built this, this near-perfect aviation bill. I think this is going to be the last subcommittee action this week, and I just want to take a minute. He's going to be taking off at the beginning of next month, and I just want to thank him for his dedicated service working in a bipartisan manner with the entire aviation team. And I'll say it again, has just been a tremendous asset to the committee, and really do appreciate his service. So. But I did want to fire him before he was able to resign. So, Chris, thank you very much. Really do appreciate your service and friendship, and good luck. With that, I recognize a gentleman from California, Mr. Sawyer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to add my thanks to your staff. I also want to, right at the beginning, say to Mr. Nels, I'm too old to yield any time to you, so you're not going to get any of my time. Mr. Administrator, you have a long, illustrious career, and I agree with many of the comments, but you've seen this industry, your organization and the industry regulates both the manufacturers and the airline companies. Clearly, the world has changed, and I worry, you mentioned this in your opening statements, it's the near misses, it's the manufacturing problems, it's NOTAMs, it's runway incursions. All of those things, to me, send bright red warning signs. And what I hear from you so far is you accept that, not to be Pollyannish, but we can't rest on our laurels. And I'm afraid in many of these hearings, prior to you getting your position, my sense is that the FAA was resting on its previous track record. And quite frankly, your organization reminds me of NASA just before the Challenger disaster and the observation by the commission that institutional deviation, but with you it's writ large into the culture. So that is comment, the safety culture of these companies. The perfect storm to me is this long, wonderful relationship between the Department of Defense, the military, and aviation, both contractually in manufacturing and supplying workforce. And then this changing. At the same time, we have issues around climate change, and we're coming out of COVID. Airbus and Boeing, they had great profits after consolidation, and now Boeing is losing money. Airbus is close to losing money. Similarly, in your conversations with the air carriers, the commercial air carriers, enormous pressure. Warren Buffett had a great line about investing in airlines. He said, I have an 800 number. I call at 3 in the morning to say, this is Warren Buffett. I'm afraid I'm going to invest in air stocks again. Please talk me out of it. But he still did it. So the safety culture versus the risk assessment from the details of, in the FAA reauthorization, one of the parts that we put in there, in the case of Alaska, the root cause can go back and find out who actually worked on that plane, what hours they worked on. I'm told Airbus has that information when they do it. So those simple things from the safety culture writ large, I would like your response. And as you talk to the CEOs who are under enormous pressure coming out of COVID, when we kept them in business and with ridership going up, to avoid losses in an investment market that can move very quickly away from them, that would create greater damage. And then on top of that, you've got Boeing that's not going to be able to supply the product that they're contractually already into and have serious financial disadvantage to delay that too long. So that's a long question about safety culture. How do you maintain a safety culture or return to that safety culture that we used to have and I think we've lost, and we're one disaster away from the industry imploding?
Thank you for the question. I think you've hit on some really true points. I have been reemphasizing since I've been at the agency that we can't rest on our laurels. We have to be ever vigilant to look for risks in the system, and that's been the focus for the past 3 months. And safety, culture and safety is really important, and it's one of the things we're going to be looking at with Boeing. We've got a safety culture review that was commissioned as part of the CERT reform legislation that's going to be complete later this month, and I think that will be informative. But at the end of the day, the goal is to make safe airplanes, and I don't think if you don't have that safety culture, I think it's hard to make safe airplanes. So We're going to be very focused on the quality process, and really looking at wherever the data takes us as we do this audit. We have to get back to a culture where safety is first. I don't care what's second, but safety has to be first, and that's where we need to get.
And on the operational side, on the NOTAMs or the near misses, same thing. I've talked to pilots who really express, and air traffic controllers, that we're pushing a lot of product from pressure from the operators.
Yeah, that's right. And I think in my realm, controllers was one of the first orders of business. It's a lot of folks working overtime and have been doing so for years. And that's not a sustainable thing in my view. So hiring as many controllers as we can and looking at fatigue as a risk that needs to be mitigated is our approach there.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Administrator, I want to thank you for being here today. And I know that it was touched upon by a couple of my colleagues already, but I have some further questions. 92 days ago, you were copied on a letter that was sent to the Transportation Secretary by members not only of this committee and other committees, but by the chairman of the subcommittee, the chairman of the full committee, and 68 other members of the House. The letter asked very straightforward questions about the Biden administration's plan to house illegal immigrants and migrants at FAA sites and airports, some of our largest transportation hubs in this nation, including one that's just blocks away from my district at JFK Airport. We requested a response by November 20th, 2023. Today is February 6th, 2024, and we haven't gotten any response. So I'd like to submit the letter for the record, again, signed by 68 other members of the House, sent 92 days ago. And since we haven't heard back, I'd like to pose the questions from the letter to you right now. How many and which airports regulated by the FAA currently host temporary or permanent shelters for illegal immigrants or other persons?
I don't have any information about that.
Okay. I also want to point out that probably not mentioned in the letter, and I know wasn't mentioned by my colleagues, I took a visit to JFK Airport just days after this site was apparently approved. I coordinated with Mayor Adams' office, I coordinated with the Port Authority, TSA, and I spent a career in the NYPD as a detective. And one of the most startling things that I found when I got to JFK Airport was not the fact that the FAA or the City of New York actually had me go all the way to JFK Airport only to tell me that the meeting was canceled and they were not going to allow me to tour the facility. But the biggest concern that I have is that there is zero communication amongst agencies at that airport. Nobody knows who's in there. Nobody knows what's going on. I mean, it is a transportation hub, probably one of the largest in the country, and we have people just wandering the streets coming out of this facility. I'm not sure how anyone thought that this was a good idea. Has the FAA received or granted any request from an airport or a local, state, or federal agency between January 20th, 2021 and today to temporarily use a facility for purposes of hosting a migrant shelter?
I don't have direct information. I'm happy to respond after with a response to that.
To what extent has DHS consulted with the FAA about the appropriateness of proposing to house migrants at airports?
I don't have any direct information about that.
If DHS has consulted with the FAA, what has been the FAA's response?
Again, I have no direct information on this.
Committee staff asked in a follow-up email if the FAA could provide a detailed description of any analysis or assessment of the DHS housing plan or any other instance of airport migrant housing that has been conducted by the FAA in accordance with the FAA's safety risk management policy. The decision to approve housing of migrants poses a serious security threat and represents failure of the Biden administration's disastrous border policies. Does the FAA have a plan in place to ensure that any of these sites, even the ones that perhaps you don't know about yet, will no longer be used to house migrants?
I don't have any information about that.
Okay. So we have, you're the administrator of the FAA, and you don't have any information on any FAA locations that have housed migrants or could potentially house migrants.
To my knowledge, there are no FAA locations that house migrants.
To your knowledge, are there any FAA locations that were approved to house migrants?
I mean, I don't consider an airport an FAA location. Maybe you're talking about airports.
The FAA has to approve in order for them to become migrant shelters.
We approve community use agreements, yes.
Okay. And at no point did the FAA think that perhaps it was a bad idea to house migrants in these locations?
I don't have any information on what FAA was thinking before I got there.
Okay. So when did you take reins as administrator?
End of October.
End of October. Okay. So on November 6, 2023 was when the letter was sent. It's now February 6, 2024. We still haven't received a response. Will you commit today in front of this committee that in 1 month you will respond to the questions that were asked in this letter?
1 month from today, I will, yes.
From 1 month today. So by March 6th of 2024, we will have an answer to all of the questions?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I now recognize from New Jersey, Mr. Menendez.
Thank you, Chairman. Today I want to focus on the constant helicopter noise we face in our district, in New Jersey's 8th Congressional District. It's a densely populated urban area. I've heard from countless constituents about helicopters that fly at low altitudes for prolonged periods of time, shaking apartment buildings and disrupting enjoyment of public spaces, such as our urban oasis of Liberty State Park. Residents are also concerned that helicopters have been using new flight paths without input or notice to residents. How does the FAA monitor and enforce helicopter altitudes and decibel limits in areas like New Jersey's 8th Congressional District and Liberty State Park?
So we don't have direct authority over noise per se, but what we do have is operating rules for helicopters. So they're required to operate at certain altitudes as they traverse land. But beyond that, it's they fly routes according to what's available in the airspace.
And the monitoring component, how do you monitor their altitude?
Well, they monitor their own altitude. We would get reports if there's altitude deviations. That could come from a variety of sources, but for all operations in the air, there are certain minimum altitudes to be operated at.
Understood. And what can the FAA do to address persistent and burdensome helicopter noise?
So I think the most effective tool that we have found is community meetings sponsored by a government entity, usually an airport, that are open and inclusive, so include not only the immediate affected areas, but also areas surrounding that, so that there's an ability to have a community dialogue around solutions.
Great, and that's a great segue. Last week I wrote to you highlighting the impact helicopter noise has on the district. My office and the Hudson County Board of Commissioners have received a growing level of complaints and are requesting the opportunity to discuss the issue and potential solutions during a public meeting with your representative from the FAA. I want to formally invite you to our district to experience this issue firsthand and to work together towards a solution by attending this public meeting with the Hudson County Board of Commissioners.
We'd be happy to have a representative participate, provided it's, as I mentioned, a government-sponsored meeting and one that includes a very broad community. And I think it's also useful to include zoning officials, since some of this is also zoning-related, which is outside of our domain as well, sir.
Yeah, absolutely, and we would be happy to build a broad coalition of folks there and different stakeholders to ensure that's a productive meeting for the representative that's able to attend. Switching gears, I'm glad that the FAA has taken serious steps to deal with terrible assaults and violent incidents against flight crews, and I commend the agency's efforts in taking on this issue. However, I'm still concerned that assaults against landside employees aren't receiving the same level of response. These workers work directly with customers who are experiencing delays, cancellations, or other complications with their travel. The 2018 FAA reauthorization bill tasked the FAA with implementing employee assault prevention and response plans. Those plans have yet to be put into place, and I've tried to fix this problem through my bill, the Airline Employee Assault Prevention Act. While I'm pleased that the House-passed version included pieces of this bill, the work is far from over. Mr. Whitaker, do you know why these plans haven't been implemented yet?
I'm not familiar with that specific plan. I do share your concern about obviously assaults on not only flight crew but in the airport. I think the airport space becomes a little more complicated. You don't have the clear authorities and the sort of captive environment, it's unclear, for example, what TSA's involvement might be, what the local police involvement might be, what the airport's involvement. So I think the issue becomes murkier in the airport environment. This issue has been raised to me, and I've had some discussions with airport directors about that. So it is an issue of concern.
Yeah, and we understand it's a jurisdictional issue, and that's what part of our legislation was meant to address, to ensure that these assault prevention plans cover both the air and land side. And so I want to make sure we work with all partners to ensure that all folks and employees are kept safe, especially sort of as some of these travel challenges lead to upset passengers and they have unfortunate impacts. So I look forward to working with you on this issue and appreciate your testimony here today. Thanks so much.
Sir. Yeah, we will follow up on that issue with you.
Great, thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Menendez, and I recognize Mr. Massey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Whitaker, I've heard from several aircraft manufacturers and component manufacturers that the certification process at the FAA has become even more long and arduous than normal in a post-COVID era. Some of this they attribute to people not returning to work in the office yet after COVID. Some of it is because there are a lot of new employees who don't have as much familiarity as the more senior employees did who left. What are you doing, or what do you plan to do to improve this certification process so that U.S. companies can be competitive and improve safety and efficiency for our pilots and passengers?
So it is a very important issue, and we have a number of things that we're looking at doing. One is creating more transparency in the process, so we identify where an application is, why it's not moving. So sometimes it's because we're still waiting for data, or sometimes maybe we have the data and we're not moving fast enough. So we want to get some certainty around that. I think there's been a little bit of overcorrection following the MAX events, frankly, a little more conservative approach, and I think having clear leadership and clear process so we can resolve decisions is an important part of that, and we're looking at ways to do that. It's an important issue and one we're working on.
There's another area of efficiency that I've heard from people that may need to be addressed, and I might not be articulating this exactly correctly, but a pilot explained to me that when pilots have to leave for health reasons and then that health reason is overcome and then they try to get back into the system, that there's not enough people, or that process is also being delayed and has a long lead time. And I think that's particularly problematic given the chronic shortage of pilots. Is he correct in that, and is there anything you can do about that?
He is correct in that. I've had 2 flight instructors who both went through that, and they both complained to me about how long it took. So we're trying to move that approach. It's not unrelated to the mental health arc that we've stood up, just trying to make the system clearer and be able to get to decisions more quickly. So that's something we're looking at as well.
Another thing in the line of in that line of questioning with pilot shortages, training is a big issue, and getting pilots through that process. And it just came to my attention that the GI Bill, it's a great program for veterans, and it covers a lot of things, but it doesn't cover some of the things that you need to become a pilot. And I would think using a GI Bill to get those hours that you need to become a certified pilot may be more important than basket weaving, a degree in basket weaving, which the GI Bill will cover. So would you be supportive of having more flexibility in the GI Bill so that we could use that money that these veterans have earned in service to their country in order to become pilots?
I absolutely would, and I would favor treating pilot training the way you treat any other educational endeavor to get a status. It's expensive to become a pilot, takes a long time, so I would fully support that.
Another question that I have, we used to see these notices at the airport that said you need to have a real ID to fly come a certain date, and that date kept getting pushed back, and now I don't see the signs at all. Are we going to have a real ID, or that has the new and improved driver's license, if you will, in order to fly anytime soon?
That would typically be regulated by TSA, so I'm not really familiar with that issue.
Okay. Because, I think it is a concern. There's a lot of bureaucracy that was implemented in order to do all that. One other question that I have is, I know a lot of, maybe not a lot, but there were some pilots who left because of vaccine mandates, and I don't know if the air traffic controllers had that same issue, but what are you doing to make it easier for them to come back to work?
It's not an issue that I've run across. I'll look into that and happy to respond.
But you are aware that some pilots did leave because of the COVID vaccine mandate?
Well, that would be between the pilots and the airlines, but I can look into the controller. It's not an issue I've become familiar with, but I'm happy to look at it.
Well, if we're looking into I appreciate you agreeing to look into that, because if we're looking into the chronic shortage, which does affect issues that you do have to deal with, I think that's an important thing to look at.
Yep.
So appreciate your time today, and good luck finding all the inefficiencies. I'm sure you'll find all of them, and you'll have perfect solutions to everything. And thank you for addressing the certification process, because I think that is really important. We want to make sure U.S. companies are competitive and they can get their products certified. That will increase awareness and safety for pilots and passengers.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. I now recognize Ms. Sultan for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I want to thank our chairman and ranking member for hosting this hearing, and thank you so much, Mr. Whitaker, for taking the time to be here, not only as a member of this committee, but as a mother and a frequent flyer myself. Now, because of this is also a deeply personal issue. When I fly with my kids and back home to my kids, the safety and security of air travel is essential. You have a mighty task in this new role, and we know that you are up to it. I thank you for your patience in handling all the questions today. I have two questions for you. One is general for all air travelers, and then another specific for my district. We've talked a little bit in this hearing today about the differences in approval delegations. We on this committee may understand the differences between design and manufacturing approval delegations, but for the American people, they don't necessarily know that. They know that hundreds of people died in 2018 and 2019 because of the Boeing 737 MAXs. And they know that now there are terrifying experiences happening to travelers on essentially those same planes. What are we doing to not only assure safety, but that assure that people can feel safe in this after this investigation process? Maybe more specifically, what are you specifically tasking MITRE to examine in terms of reclaiming certain approval authorities? And if you can give some examples of that.
Thank you. So the MITRE tasking is to really look at what's been delegated and what our options are for reeling in that delegation, and what areas are being undertaken by the manufacturer that could be done by a third party, for example. So really it's a question of looking at having a neutral third party overseeing parts of this process. So we'll see what they come up with. You're right, there's confusion between the design delegation, which is really where a lot of delegation happens, and manufacturing, where there's less delegation, but there are functions that look like oversight, like quality control, that don't seem to be being properly executed. So the audit is designed to allow us to really understand what are the impacted areas, why is it not working, and what are our tools for fixing it, whether that's bring a third party in to oversee it or somehow change other incentives or the process.
Thank you. Again, for the sake of the passengers, for the sake of the industry, which we all rely on, we implore you to make it clear in these studies what has been done and what has been undertaken to assure safety for the American people going forward.
Yes.
My second question is a little bit more district specific. Grand Rapids is home to the Gerald R. Ford International Airport. It is one of the busiest 75 airports in the entire country, one of the first airports to return to pre-pandemic levels. We had record travel numbers in 2023, close to 4 million travelers through the terminal, up 6% from a previous record in 2019. And yet, it has the oldest airport tower of all of the top 75 busiest. Currently, there are no standards for how and when we replace these airport towers. I hope to change that through my bill, which was included in the FAA reauthorization, which we're hoping the Senate will act on any day now. But the important thing is, you don't need to wait for them to act. The FAA owns this tower, and the community cannot replace it until the FAA says so. Can you speak a little bit to the importance of infrastructure in ensuring safety around the country?
So I can. Infrastructure is a huge challenge. We have a lot of it at FAA, and a lot of it is really beyond its useful life, including, for example, all of the high altitude control centers that are designed for no more than 50 years of service, and they're pushing 60 at this point. The funding for that has been a challenge over time, and maintenance falls behind. So I can certainly look into that particular instance that you've cited, but it is a problem throughout the NAS.
Thank you, and we'd be grateful for you having a look.
Yep, thanks.
Thank you again for your testimonies today.
Thank you.
Thank you. I now recognize Mr. Collins for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good to see there, Administrator Whitaker. And I guess I want to kind of start out with, I've been running like crazy, so I had to change hats for a second. But I had the opportunity last year to go to the Atlanta airport. I'm out of Georgia, and visited the tower, the airport, and TRACON. So we've down to just one more facility that we want to visit up there, and very impressive. So I know you've got your work cut out for you. And like so many agencies and so many hearings that I attend, I think one of the main themes that I get over and over again is how we have such a lack of modernization and antiquated. I don't care if it's software, hardware, whatever it is. It seems like the federal government just doesn't do anything to stay up to date or improve their technology. So last year with NOTAM going down, and from my perspective, it looked like that the Department of Transportation spent a lot of time on just changing the name of that acronym instead of updating that 30-year-old software, which was where they should have had their focus. Can you tell me what steps you've taken since your confirmation to speed up the modernization of technology, where we're at on NOTAM, and what other specific systems you may have updated?
So I think one of the challenges that we have is as we do modernize, we get stuck with a lot of legacy systems that are hard to take out of the airspace. Even some of the systems that were in place before we were born are still used. And sometimes it's the military that relies on those systems, and sometimes it's just folks that have been flying a long time. So we end up supporting a huge amount of antiquated systems, and that impedes our ability to modernize. There's been a lot of modernization over the past 10 or 15 years. What you would have seen in the TRACON and the center are new systems, and basically a new platform for new technologies to make the system more efficient. But there are over 1,000 systems that make up the airspace. Some of them are pretty old, and I think what we saw with the NOTAM is we really need to have the redundancies in place to make sure that if there's a failure, it doesn't bring the whole system to a halt. So we're very focused on the resiliency of that system, and part of what I'll be doing going forward is starting to have conversations about what the next phase of modernization is. I think the next gen phase is over, and now we need to talk about how these new technologies, advanced air mobilities and drones are coming into the system and how it's going to operate in the future.
All right. One of the other policies that I am focused on here in this committee is high-speed, high-altitude travel and civil aviation, as a matter of fact. And as a matter of fact, we got put into the FAA reauthorization an amendment that states that the FAA needs to come up with a study on how to certify new hypersonic engines. And if you look at FAA, the European counterpart, ESA, they already have issued a roadmap for high-altitude operations for hypersonic, supersonic aircraft. So can you tell us what, if anything, FAA is doing to prepare similar guidance for American airspace? And further, can you tell me what else the agency can do to ensure that American companies continue to lead in this innovative field?
I don't have a specific answer on the high-altitude airspace, but it will be part of what we look at as we talk about the airspace of the future. And we'll also look at what EASA is doing and what other jurisdictions are doing, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. But I think we need also our own comprehensive roadmap that integrates these new technologies and gives us a way to bring them on as quickly as possible while keeping that same level of safety that we all want.
You know, Ed, my time's almost up, but I just wanted to make a last quick comment. When I was at TRACON, they were about 40% down on air traffic controllers. We use a lot of veterans, and they're great people to put in those positions because they're very organized and very dedicated. And I would just caution you, it seems like we've made a move to get away from hiring people on qualifications and hiring them on classifications.
So I can assure you that we hire everybody on qualifications, and I can also tell you that we have just recently put in changes to be much more flexible in how we hire out of the military, because we're able to hire from the military and put them directly into facilities. So that's one area that we're really trying to open the pipeline on.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I yield back.
I now recognize Ms. Holmes Norton for 5 minutes.
I thank the chair and ranking member for holding this hearing to learn more about the challenges the Federal Aviation Administration is currently facing and to emphasize the importance of passing a long-term FAA reauthorization bill soon. Mr. Whitaker is co-chair of the Quiet Skies Caucus and the member who represents the District of Columbia, which is plagued by aviation noise. I have been fighting to reduce aviation noise in D.C. and across the country. Whilst the safety of the aviation system must be the FAA's priority, the FAA needs to do much more to combat airplane and helicopter noise, which will harm the health, quality of life, and the structural integrity of homes. Last year, I got 2 provisions, including in the House-passed FAA reauthorization bill, to combat helicopter noise in D.C. One of these provisions would require the FAA within 180 days to create and implement a helicopter noise sharing mechanism for all helicopter operators in the National Capital Region and to make the data collected accessible to the public online. This data would help us develop additional solutions to address helicopter noise. My other provision would direct the Government Accountability Office to conduct a study of reducing helicopter noise in D.C., almost all of which is generated by government helicopters. This study would be required to consider the extent to which military operators consider operating over unpopulated areas outside of D.C. for training missions, the extent to which vehicles or aircraft other than helicopters could be used for emergency and law enforcement response, and the extent to which helicopter operators have assessed and addressed the noise impacts of various factors of operating helicopters, including altitude, the number of flights, flight paths, time of day of flights, types of aircraft, operating procedures, and pilot training. Mr. Whitaker, what, if any, steps is the FAA taking to reduce airplane and helicopter noise over populated areas like the District of Columbia?
What I can say is in the past several years, they've made some improvements in that area. They've hired specific folks who are focused on community engagement. And in situations where airspace is being redesigned or where there are persistent noise issues, they'll engage with organizations to have community meetings and understand the views of the citizens and see if there are actually real-time changes that can happen in the airspace to try to mitigate.
We certainly haven't heard it yet. It hasn't been felt here yet.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of DC. I know that we're on a fairly tight footprint, and the approach paths are fairly limited by the restricted airspace, so there probably aren't a lot of options beyond the north-south arrival and departure for DCA. So that may be a limiter in this case.
All right, thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I now recognize Mr. Nels for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. Understand here, Mr. Administrator, I'm not on this subcommittee, so they had to wave me on. So I'm the last one in line here, but hopefully we can finish this, and I thank you so very much for your time. Obviously, this is very, very important to the industry. It really is. This legislation obviously has passed this House. It passed it overwhelmingly, and now it's sitting there over in the Senate. I think we beat the dead horse on Part 135. Everybody knows, the FAA knows that we have pilots flying around that are 67 years old in these private aircraft with everybody else, with Delta, and we fire them at the age of 65. And that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I find this letter that was issued just a day or so before the Senate markup of a bill that has lingered for over a year on a matter that has been repeatedly proposed over 4 years, a matter that which you were asked specifically in hearings. You had a hearing before the Appropriations Committee just a few months ago, and you answered quite matter-of-factly about faithfully executing the legislation of Congress, and I think we agree with that. This is Congress's decision to make, and you will implement once it's passed, correct? All right. So now it seems like this letter, which I believe is full of flaws, and I think we've pointed those out, it seems to have some opposition to raising the age. If you read the letter and you read between the lines, it appears that the FAA that you, sir, are against raising this age, and that's just not true. You are not opposing it.
My intent was not to oppose it. My intent was to identify the issues that we've identified during technical assistance, which is around international compliance and around data for what this means to raise.
Yes, sir. And I think that we've addressed all those issues with ICAO when we raised the age from 60 to 65. All those issues got worked out. The gray on gray, remember all the gray on gray, ICAO did it. We obviously had it here, and now we don't even have the gray on gray. So the point is, I think about looking at your background, you're a former pilot, and I think you're 62 years old. You're 62 years old, right? And I think you have a 5-year term, 5 years. Do you think that we should give you a cognitive test when you turn 65? Before you finish your term out, do not believe that we should give you a test to make sure that you're all there. You got the cognitive when you turn 65. I mean, we do it for the pilots. We do it. They get their EKGs, they get their physicals. I mean, that is a stringent process. We do it for them. Why shouldn't we do it for you?
So I think with respect to regulating airmen and the safety of the NAS, the medical certification is there to protect.
I agree.
So.
And you agree we have the safest aviation record the past 10 years. I mean, things are going very, very well, knowing that we passed legislation that allowed the Part 135s to fly to 67. We haven't had any issues. You have any issues right there with Part 135 right now? Any concerns with that safety record?
As I said earlier, I have not looked at that data.
I think, well, I'll help you. There is no problem there. There is no problem. You heard of Wheels Up? You know who that is? Delta's own little private version of their, right? I wonder how they would feel, the Delta's CEO, if you start raising concerns about their safety as it relates to Part 131. Dave in the audience, this guy right here, been at Delta for 30 years, former Air Force spy plane pilot. He's 63 and a half. America, we're going to fire this guy in 18 months. It's an arbitrary number. We just come up with it, 65. Let's just fire him. He goes through all the testing. He does it all, but we are going to fire this man because of that age. But yet, sir, you are out there touting a project to recruit retired, experienced military air traffic controllers, but an existing, fully qualified and not yet retired pilot is somehow unsatisfactory. Nobody in this hearing, my friend, I think Mr. Massey brought it up once, talked about retirement age today. Nobody brought it up because it passed this committee. It passed the House of Representatives overwhelmingly. And now it's over in the Senate. Alpha got beat over here. Ambrosi got beat. Now he's kind of through a train wreck and try to get you to confuse the other members in the Senate with this letter making it sound like this isn't safe. All the data's there. The live environment testing's there. You can reach out to Japan, all these other countries. You know that we got pilots flying at 67, Part 135. It's all there. All the data is there. And ALPA, matter of fact, Ambrosi was served last night with a lawsuit. 2,500 ALPA union paying members filed a lawsuit on Ambrosi for a breach of duty for fair representation. Shame on him. Let's get this done. And I think, sir, it is incumbent upon you to get some clarification as it relates to this letter before the Senate meets on Thursday. Would you be willing to do that for me? Look at this letter?
I'm sorry, I'd be willing to do
Would
what?
you be willing to look at this letter and look at this and try to say, hey, listen, there's some problems with this letter. It's not true.
I think I've clarified the intent of the letter.
Very good. I appreciate that. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Are there any further questions from members of the committee who have not been recognized? Seeing none, that concludes our hearing for today. I would like to thank the witness for his testimony. The committee stands adjourned.